I wore my fuzzy Christmas sweater just to kind of get in the Christmas spirit. So, Elf. Elf is the story of Buddy, played by Will Ferrell. Buddy sneaks into Santa's sack at a very young age and is then actually brought back to the North Pole. Buddy's from an orphanage, so Santa decides to go ahead and let Papa Elf raise him as an elf. Years later, Buddy realizes he's much different from the other elves. He's way taller than all the other elves, all the tools he uses are way too small for his size, and he's rubbish at making toys. One day it slips that he's actually not an elf, he is human. And so they let him know that his father lives in New York City, so he sets out to find him and unite with them. And we have our movie. Elf captures a perfect innocence that's excellent to get into the Christmas spirit. Will Ferrell absolutely crushes it as Buddy, and it really helps sell the movie. This was in the middle of the Will Ferrell craze, and to see him expand his range to more of a comedic, kid-oriented Christmas movie is a nice added change to his repertoire. James Caan and Zooey Deschanel were also supporting characters, and I thought they did very well, and it helped add to the fun where we got to see Buddy transition from living amongst elves to living amongst humans, them being the benefactors of that made for a really interesting time. There's a lot of magic captured in the purity of Buddy's heart, and I think that's what really helps set this movie apart from other Christmas films. And although the movie isn't as perfect as I remember it being, it's still a great movie to get you in the holiday spirit. Starting off with what I really enjoyed about this movie, Will Ferrell is excellent. I alluded to this a little earlier, but the movie solely relies on Buddy and his life and trying to adjust to his life in New York City. There's a lot that comes with that transition between living in the North Pole as an elf to living as a human in one of the biggest cities in the world, but it's captured so well in this movie, especially with Will Ferrell as he portrays a sense of gullibility, innocence, and goodness that really sells this transition and makes for a very funny, whimsical watch. The main reason being that the social norms that elves have are vastly different from what humans have, and when you see Will Ferrell really lean into the social norms of elves while living in a human world, it heavily violates the norms of the human world, and it leads to some unintended consequences that are hilarious. And when I say lean into it, Will Ferrell really leans into it, and like I said, just sells the movie entirely. Because while it's funny and comedic to us, for the other characters who are going through this, it actually really peeves them off, or even in some cases even charms them because of how innocent and good he is. But at the end of the day, Will Ferrell did such a great job portraying Buddy that I could never ever picture anybody else portraying him. Also, I thought the supporting cast was pretty strong. James Caan and Zooey Deschanel were both supporting roles. James Caan plays Walter, Buddy's dad, who is a real schmuck at the beginning of this movie and really sells that Christmas character to perfection. Ultimately, it's a character we've seen many times before, but the way James Caan goes about it is really done well. He is very intense, but also has to be patient within his anger, and you can really feel how angry he gets, but he's holding back the restraint. There are many times where I thought to myself, wow, Walter's a real jerk, and when a character or an actor can sell their performance enough to get you to feel that way, it's the sign of a good job. And such as the case with Zooey Deschanel as Jovi, who's Buddy's love interest. She's on the opposite end of Buddy, where she finds his violation of norms annoying, but charming at the same time. Basically, she's a little bit more patient and heartfelt with it than Walter is. And Zoe does a great job in that role. And although she plays a character that we've seen a million times being the love interest of our protagonist, the way she goes about it is really great. She transitions her behavior throughout the movie as her relationship with Buddy evolves. And lastly, I thought the movie's writing was brilliant. I would argue comedy is one of the hardest things to land in film and television. That's especially difficult when you've got a Christmas movie that's typically a little bit more light-hearted. You have to almost have good, clean fun. However, Elf really walks that line well with the writing of Buddy. Buddy is written with a high level of innocence and kindness that is pretty not typical amongst mere mortals like us. And the movie takes us a little bit further by creating a character that's constantly violating norms like I mentioned earlier. And when you clash the two together, you get some very unintended consequences that produce some hilarious results. There are many times with Buddy where other characters are sarcastic with him, but he takes everything at face value because he's really gullible. And that leads to some really funny, intense moments where you're not expecting it and he thinks everything is going fine, but to us having those human social norms are like, wow, that is so bad. However, what did I not like so much about this movie? The movie's pacing was a little awkward, especially in the second half. Elf had a runtime of about an hour and a half, which I think for a Christmas comedy is perfect. However, the way that the movie spends their time is very uneven. The introduction, when we get to know our characters, the stakes, the situation, they spend a lot more time in that than in the resolution resolution of a lot of these conflicts and building stakes. And because of that, it sort of rushes through what I think could have been the most major moments of the movie, and it really killed the potential, because all of those moments are crammed into about the last 25 minutes. But the last 25 minutes of the movie felt like it should have been an entire half of the movie, but instead it only encompassed about a third of the movie. Many major moments happen in that 25 minutes that are just kind of rushed through and really damage the payoff. I could have dealt with the movie having a slightly longer runtime, maybe of about 10 minutes, to spend more time in the resolution of these major moments. Or if the movie spent a little less time in the introduction and more towards the moments that happen within that 25 minutes, I think that would have been appropriate too. And I normally don't advocate for a movie being longer than it is, but if this movie just had 10 more minutes, I think that would have sufficed. Also, despite an awesome start to this movie, I think the second half is particularly weak. This is in part due to the pacing issues that I mentioned earlier, but it's also due to the weakness of the writing in the second half, which is really strange. It's like this movie is a tale of two halves. The first half is really excellent, it's really well written, and the second half is just not so much. And like I said earlier, the movie's second half introduces a lot of major moments that are just sort of glossed over, and I think if they would have spent more time with it, it would have made for a better second half. But in addition to that, it also spends a lot of time on moments that are the opposite, where they're shallow and they don't really feel like they have a lot of weight to them. For example, high stakes are starting to get introduced, but they really don't feel like they have any weight to them, and they feel meaningless. It feels like they kind of threw in these competing forces or this conflict for the sake of creating conflict and to create suspense, but it just doesn't feel all that suspenseful at the end of the day, and it really just feels kind of wasted. You just don't truly buy into the conflict that you're seeing, and therefore it's not much of a conflict. Although the movie wasn't as perfect as I remember it as I was younger, I'm gonna have to give this movie an 8 out of 10. It was a great watch and a great Christmas tradition for any of you looking for one. Friends, have you seen Elf? If so, what'd you think of it? You know where the comment section is. Let me know. Thanks so much for watching another Bankrupt Hippo movie review. If you like this, click right here if you'd like to see more. I've been Bryson. Until next time, have a great day.